Fine, students. So we were doing the factors influencing attitude change. And we have discussed under that the characteristics of the existing attitude, the source characteristics, the message characteristics, and the target characteristics, right? So this is all about the factors influencing attitude change. Now, next topic is attitude behavior relationship. As you all can see, two words are there, two concepts are there. First is attitude and second one is behavior. So attitude behavior relationship means what? We usually expect what that behavior to follow logically from attitudes. What does it mean? First of all, what we do, we form attitudes, certain attitudes toward anyone, right? Positive, negative, and then accordingly we behave in a manner. Fine. So this is a very obvious thing which we expect. But sometimes it also happens that actual behavior also may be contrary to one's attitude towards a particular topic. What does it mean? We are having a positive attitude toward someone. Let's take an example, right? I'm having a positive attitude for someone. This is my attitude, right? And it is positive. But whenever I interact with that person, or whenever I'm doing any kind of behavior, I'm indulged in any kind of activity with that person, the behavior or the attitude all of a sudden becomes negative, right? Attitude is positive for that person, but my behavior shows negativeness. So there is a contrary, there is a opposite of two, opposite to each other. My attitude is positive, but my behavior is negative. How come? We're going to understand this thing with a very good example. But before that, let us discuss. Psychologists have found that there would be consistency between attitudes and behavior when there are certain conditions. What are those conditions? The attitude is strong and occupies a central place in the attitude system. As we talked about, yes, the characteristics of attitudes. Into that, we have talked about valence, the simplicity, the complexity, right? The centrality. So if some attitude is very strong, right? Any attitude is very strong and it is occupying a central place in the attitude system, then there will be a consistency between attitude and behavior. Consistency means the way you are having an attitude, the same kind of behavior you are showing, right? There is no oppositeness. Second condition is what? The person is aware of her or his attitude. When the person is fully and consciously aware about his attitude toward anyone, then also there will be a consistency in his behavior and in his attitude. The third condition is there is very little or no external pressure for the person to behave in a particular way. For example, when there is no group pressure to follow a particular norm. Now, sometimes it happens that we are having a positive attitude towards someone, but as we are in a group, we belong to any group, and that group is not having a positive attitude towards that person. So we also start developing a negative attitude, right? So this is because of our group pressure or any kind of external pressure. From internal, we want to have a positive attitude, but due to some external or group pressure, we are not able to hold that, right? So there will be inconsistency between your attitude and behavior. Fine. The next condition is the person's behavior is not being watched or evaluated by others. It happens with us generally. Whenever we are aware that somebody is watching us consistently, somebody is watching us constantly, we become little bit conscious, right? And we start behaving in a very conscious manner, in a very disciplined manner, right? In the same manner, if somebody is watching us, then what we do, we always show the acceptable kind of attitudes. Suppose for a certain issue, for a certain topic, if we are aware that somebody is recording us or somebody is listening us, then we will say all good things about the topic, right? But when we are just doing a very casual kind of discussion between with our friends or between any group, we usually express our true attitudes. So that could also include the negative one. So the person's behavior is not being watched or evaluated by others. If it is the condition, then also there will be a consistency between the behavior and attitude of that person. Fine. The last condition is the person thinks that the behavior would have a positive consequence and therefore intends to engage in that behavior. If a person is thinking that the behavior will have a positive consequence, right? My behavior, whatever I'm doing any kind of activity that will be a positive consequence, then also he will intend to engage in that kind of behavior. So that will also certainly result in what? The consistency between his attitude and his behavior. That means the attitude and behavior will be the same. So these are certain conditions which show the consistency between attitudes and behavior. Now the thing which we have just discussed, I just stated down, whenever actual behavior is there, fine, actual behavior may be contrary to one's attitude toward toward a particular topic. Let us understand this with the help of this example. In the days when Americans were said to be prejudiced against the Chinese. See, there was a time when Americans were considered to be prejudiced against the Chinese. Means Americans were considered that they have certain prejudices for Chinese people, right? We will discuss later what is exactly prejudice means. Fine, but for right now, just understand that in this example, Americans were said to be prejudiced against the Chinese. There was a psychologist, Richard Lapierre, an American social psychologist, conducted the following study. Now he has conducted some study. Through this, we're going to understand this attitude behavior relationship. So Richard has conducted a study. What he has done into that study, he asked a Chinese couple to travel across the United States and stay in different hotels, right? Only once during these occasions, the Chinese couple were refused service by one of the hotels, right? Sometime later, Lapierre sent out questionnaires to managers of hotels and tourist homes in the same areas where the Chinese couple had traveled, asking them if they would give accommodation to Chinese guests. A very large percentage said that they would not do so, right? This was the response of the managers of hotels and tourist homes. This response clearly showing a negative attitude towards the Chinese, right? But it is very inconsistent with the positive behavior that was actually shown towards the traveling Chinese couple. Thus, attitudes may not always predict actual pattern of one's behavior. Understood the thing? What he has done in his study? There was a time when Americans were considered prejudiced against the Chinese people, right? So he has conducted a study. He has asked a Chinese couple to travel, across a certain area in United States. So the couple was traveling, and they have, they went to some of the hotels, and they have asked for the accommodation. So almost all the hotel managers and all the managers of tourist home agreed and allowed them to give the accommodation, right? So they have stayed there and they returned to their country. Now, after a time, after a particular duration, Richard, the psychologist, have given the questionnaires. He has formed some questionnaire, and he distributed those questionnaires to the managers of those hotels and tourist home to which Chinese couple has gone, right? And into that questionnaire, he has asked certain questions related to the prejudices, right? So all the managers have shown negative attitude through their answers. When the scoring was done for the questionnaire, the attitude came out to be negative. Now there is a contrary, right? There is no consistency because one time managers in their questionnaire, they are showing the negative attitude towards the Chinese couple. Suppose there was a question, will you give the accommodation to any Chinese couple? All the managers have ticked the false alternate, the false option. But when in reality that couple went to many of those hotels, all managers have agreed to give accommodation. So there is a complete inconsistency, you can see, between the attitudes of those managers and between their actual behavior, which they have shown to that Chinese couple. So this is he want to try to prove that sometimes what happened, we are having a different attitude and we are showing a different kind of behavior. But logically क्या होता है, एक दिमाग में सबसे पहले क्या बात आती है कि always our behavior follow attitudes. First of all, we form attitudes toward any topic, toward any person, toward any event, and then we perform, we start performing accordingly into that kind of behavior, which is supporting our attitude. But sometimes it happen opposite also, right? We are having negative attitude, but we are showing positive behavior. And sometimes we have positive attitude, but we are showing negative behavior. So this is what attitude behavior relationship. First of all, we're going to explain about different conditions to explain the consistency between the behavior and attitude, as we have discussed 5 of them. And after that, we're going to explain the inconsistency between the actual behavior and attitude through this example. Fine. Now just turn the page. On page number 118, they are again explaining it the other way around, right? And we have discussed this experiment. I hope you all have attended that class into which we have discussed the box number. Sometimes it is behavior that decides the attitude. Now it is happening the other way around. How come? It is behavior that decides the attitude. In the experiment by Festinger and Carl Smith, when we have discussed about box 6.2, about that example of $1 and $20. Yes, remember? So students who got only $1 for telling others that the experiment was interesting discovered that they liked the experiment. Now what is happening? Sometimes what happens is the behavior which is deciding our attitude. We are behaving in certain manner, right? And after behaving in a certain manner, we form attitude. Suppose I behaved in a positive manner toward any person, so I will also form a positive attitude toward that person. So this is what happening. पहले behavior you are showing, you are forming attitude. और generally क्या होता है कि पहले we are forming an attitude and then we behave accordingly, which is favoring that attitude, right? So just go through that box 6.2. A very interesting example has been given, and we have discussed that example in detail. So into that experiment, into that example, what it is showing, that first behavior is happening and we have behaved in a certain manner. That is why we have formed a certain attitude. Fine. So that is on the basis of their behavior. What was the behavior? That they told a lie to the waiting students outside that the experiment was interesting, but only for a very small amount of money. For only $1, they told a lie. So they concluded that their attitude towards the experiment was positive. Yes, to reduce that dissonance, I would not have told a lie for this small amount of money, which means that the experiment was actually interesting. When they realized कि सिर्फ $1 के लिए मैंने इतना बड़ा झूठ बोला कि experiment वैसे बहुत boring था, लेकिन क्या बोला waiting students को कि experiment was interesting, and I was paid $1. So that causes inconsistency and discomfort. So what that group of students had shown, they have they have just developed this thing. No, the experiment was interesting. Yes. So I have said the same thing to the waiting students that yes, the experiment was interesting, and I would not have told a lie for $1. So wo wala experiment we were try to explain the concept of consonant and dissonance. Fine. But the same experiment we can also give in this explanation that behavior decides the attitude sometimes. We behave in a certain manner and after behaving we realize whether it was positive or negative, and we form the attitude accordingly, right? So with with these two examples, we're going to explain both the things, that attitudes forms the behavior and behavior also forms the attitudes, right? So this is all about attitudes and behavior. I think prejudice and discrimination we're going to start from tomorrow, because we're not going to cover it in today's class. Okay, let us just first discuss what is prejudice. Fine. See, prejudices are examples of attitudes towards a particular group. Fine. What is the important thing? That it is a kind of attitude. You all understand by now what is attitude towards a particular group. They are usually negative. It could be positive also, but usually prejudices are negative in nature. Fine. And in many cases may be based on stereotypes. Another term came, stereotype. What is happening in many cases, prejudices are based upon certain stereotypes. What is stereotype now? Stereotype, you can say the cognitive component. Just do one thing. If you are having a pen and a paper, just start writing these things, and thereafter you're going to understand the concept very easily. Please take out pencil and start writing somewhere in the book. Also you can write, it is not too lengthy. Certain terms are there. Just write discrimination. Yes, write discrimination, word discrimination, and in bracket write behavioral component. Written. Discrimination के आगे bracket में just write behavioral component. Second line में please write stereotype. The second word is what? Stereotype, and write in bracket the cognitive component. Now the third word in the third line, dislike or hatred. Dislike or hatred, and write in bracket in front of it affective. The emotional component जो हमने discuss किया था, AFFECTIVE, affective. ठीक है, ये तीनों चीजें लिख ली. These are all part of prejudice. Now just put a full line or some kind of mark and just write prejudice. Prejudice comprises of all these things: discrimination, stereotype, and third one is dislike or hatred. Now when I'm going to explain the things, you're going to understand it easily just by looking at this. Okay? Prejudice ka first of all, these are certain attitudes toward any group, right? Second thing, these are usually negative in nature, and in some cases they are based upon certain stereotypes. Stereotypes क्या होते हैं? Cognitive component. Cognitive component मतलब जब हम किसी चीज के बारे में कोई belief रखते हैं, जब हम किसी के बारे में कोई thought रखते हैं, right? Any belief system is there about certain people, about certain topic, so that becomes automatically stereotypes. Stereotype, if I just start explaining the definition, what is it? It is a cluster of ideas. As I said, it is a cognitive component. So it consists of various beliefs and ideas, right? So stereotype is a cluster of ideas regarding the characteristics of a specific group. Here also we are talking about group, but what is the difference? We are particularly having certain ideas or certain beliefs about the characteristics of that specific group, right? So stereotype is a cluster of ideas, or you can say beliefs also, about the characteristics or regarding the characteristics of a specific group. All members belonging to this group are assumed to possess these characteristics. अब जितने भी मेंबर हैं उस ग्रुप के, हम क्या assume करते हैं? Stereotype क्यों बोलते हैं? Because we just all together start tagging all the members of that group with the same characteristics. I'll explain you with an example tomorrow, but for now, just understand that there are, suppose, 50 members into that group, and we start giving the same tag, we start giving the same characteristics of all those 50 members. How is it possible? It is not possible. When we talk in psychological context, everyone is different, right? But stereotype means that is why it is known as stereotype, that we take all the things in very general. We overgeneralize the thing. कि अगर इस ग्रुप के मेंबर हैं 50 लोग तो सबकी यही कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स होंगी. I'll explain you with an example, and I have to be very cautious also in explaining because I cannot use any example. So I have to be very cautious. So I'll just explain you through an example. It is not related to any caste. It is not related to any religion. I'll try to take a very simple and general example that could not affect anybody's emotion, right? So stereotype का ये मतलब हो गया कि हम किसी भी तरह की belief और ideas रख रहे हैं एक specific group के लिए regarding their characteristics. Fine. What else? Stereotypes consist of undesirable characteristics about the target group, and they lead to negative attitudes or prejudices towards members of specific group. Now you are getting the thing. Stereotype पहले हम form कर रहे हैं कई बार, और उसके बाद में हम prejudices develop कर रहे हैं. As we just say in the beginning that prejudices are based upon stereotypes. एक तरह से stereotype एक foundation हो गया, और prejudice क्या हो गई, एक building हो गई, right? Because upon these stereotypes we are forming certain kind of prejudices, right? So we're going to discuss the rest of the things tomorrow. Yes ma'am, we can stop with the recording.